They seem like part of life, as if they had always existed and as if we couldn't imagine living without them. Alcohol is the clearest example. But this collective familiarity doesn't change a fundamental truth. For the human body, alcohol is always an aggression. It may come wrapped in tradition and glamour, but physiologically it remains a substance that interferes with behavior, mood, sleep, cognition, metabolism, immunity, and even self-perception. This gap between social image and biological reality is why so many underestimate its impact. The pleasant feeling some describe after a drink is not balance but disruption. Regions that usually make decisions and filter impulses quiet down, while those linked to immediate pleasure gain space. It isn't true relaxation, it's a reduced ability to perceive threats or confusion. That is why the brain records alcohol as reward. The emotional loosening feels comforting after a stressful day, but what the brain interprets as comfort is chemical disorientation. The drink becomes an emotional buffer, not from weakness, but because the brain learned there is a faster route to silence discomfort. Some drink little, yet every time they feel anxiety, boredom, loneliness, or social tension, they resort to the same chemical resource. Alcohol crosses tissues easily, meaning nearly every organ, heart, gut, muscles, skin, must cope with its presence. The liver produces inflammatory compounds that, repeated over years, lead to silent wear. At first, nothing seems wrong. The human body compensates for damage for long periods, creating a dangerous illusion. The person feels fine while accumulating harm that will surface only when compensation ends. Alcohol exploits this perceptual delay. Unlike other drugs, it produces a pleasant effect that is socially rewarded. Immediate pleasure makes internal harm easier to ignore. Many know excess is harmful, but few grasp the impact of repeated small doses. Some experience sleep disruption with a single drink, others face mood swings due to metabolic changes, others notice subtle memory decline progressing over the years. Socially, alcohol alters identity perception. Many believe they become more outgoing or witty when drinking, but this enhanced version is simply temporary suppression of self-awareness and caution. Over time, the brain links authenticity to the altered state, not the natural one. This creates the feeling of not being enough without the substance, shifting confidence from internal to external. In adolescence, the effect is especially harmful. The young brain is building networks that determine social skills, planning ability, decision-making, and emotional balance. Alcohol interferes directly with this formation. Teens who drink frequently show more attention problems, impulsivity, and emotional instability in adulthood. In adulthood, the emotional impact changes form. Instead of disrupting maturation, it interferes with coping mechanisms for responsibilities, relationships, career pressure, and self-demand. The tired brain seeks quick compensation, often turning again to what worked before, reinforcing the cycle. The gut, often overlooked, is highly sensitive to alcohol. It alters microbiota composition, weakens the intestinal barrier, and increases inflammatory substances in the bloodstream. In predisposed individuals, this can trigger anxiety, mood swings, difficulty concentrating, discouragement, and physical symptoms like bloating and persistent fatigue. These issues are often mistaken for stress or poor diet, when in fact the gut is reacting to a recurring irritant. The impact of alcohol is not only what it causes. It creates shortcuts that look like solutions but carry high physiological costs. It is a silent exchange, a few minutes of relief for hours of instability. When repeated week after week, this exchange reshapes the body in ways the person doesn't notice until much later. Understanding alcohol's relationship with the human body requires honesty, not guilt or moral judgment, but clarity. Alcohol doesn't harm only in excess. It wears down the system when it becomes routine, when it replaces natural emotional tools, and when it becomes an automatic response to discomfort. And once this line is crossed, it becomes difficult to see, and even harder to undo. There comes a point in the journey of anyone who drinks frequently when the relationship with alcohol stops being a conscious choice and becomes an automatic response. It doesn't take reaching the extreme of dependence for this to happen. It only takes the brain associating the substance with relief often enough. When that association solidifies, alcohol stops being just a social moment and becomes a coping mechanism, sometimes discreet, sometimes almost imperceptible. It is in this gray zone, where everything seems normal, that many people remain for years. Silent dependence draws no attention because it doesn't disrupt life immediately. The person maintains routines, relationships, and responsibilities. On the outside, they seem stable; on the inside, emotional work grows. Alcohol prevents the brain from developing self-regulation. Emotions that should be processed are numbed, tensions that should be understood are muffled, and the emotional system loses strength to handle adversity without chemical help. Over time, small frustrations feel heavier, arguments become more intense, and inner emptiness grows. Alcohol doesn't create these feelings, but it reduces emotional tolerance. What used to be just tiredness becomes chronic exhaustion, what was temporary irritation becomes constant impatience. The person believes they are simply going through a difficult phase, when in reality their nervous system is responding to the accumulation of microwear that occurs every time they drink. Physiologically, this pattern alters the body's stress response. Alcohol interferes with hormones that regulate the circadian rhythm and support nighttime recovery. The organism remains in a state of alert even during sleep. This overloads the autonomic nervous system, impairs tissue repair, and increases the tendency toward chronic pain, persistent fatigue, increased appetite, and metabolic instability. The body feels heavy without a clear reason. With time, this overload affects areas that once seemed protected. Productivity decreases subtly, tasks that were easy now demand more energy, creativity feels less spontaneous, focus fluctuates. In relationships, the impact appears as emotional disconnection. Alcohol reduces sensitivity to emotional nuances, harming bonds even during sober moments. Physical presence remains, but emotional depth shrinks. This creates distances that are hard to name, and even harder to repair. There is also a gradual withdrawal from real life. The search for quick, intense stimuli reduces interest in activities that require time and emotional presence. Projects are postponed, long-term goals seem distant, events without alcohol lose appeal. Slowly, life narrows and revolves around avoiding discomfort, not growing or expanding. This process often leads to a sense of stagnation. The person can't explain why but feels they've lost vitality, ambition, and creative energy. They live in reduced mode, completing tasks but not experiencing life fully. Culture normalizes drinking, hiding this connection. When occasional drinking becomes a pattern, the brain adapts, and this adaptation comes at a high cost. The good news is that the brain can rebuild itself. Neuroplasticity works in favor of anyone who decides to change. But the process requires clarity and consistency. The first step is recognizing that alcohol is not neutral. It interferes with aspects not usually linked to drinking: motivation, resilience, depth of relationships, emotional stability. Understanding this removes alcohol from the zone of normality and returns the power of choice to the individual. The second step is teaching the nervous system to handle discomfort without chemical shortcuts. This includes recognizing tension before it becomes anxiety and adopting regulating habits such as walking, conscious breathing, hydration, and exposure to natural light. In the first days, irritability may appear, but it is part of withdrawing from artificial neurochemical shortcuts. With weeks of consistency, changes emerge, sleep deepens, mental clarity improves, energy stabilizes. The person realizes they can face challenges without emotional anesthesia. Relationships become more authentic. Presence is no longer filtered through artificial disinhibition. The world regains textures that were muted: mood nuances, simple pleasures, curiosity for new experiences. Most importantly, the person rediscovers internal resources they believed they lacked. Years of drinking can convince them they are fragile, anxious, insecure. When alcohol leaves the routine, the brain shows those traits were learned, not real. Emotional strength returns when internal chemistry stabilizes. The journey, however, is not linear. There will be relapses, doubts, temptation, emotional resistance. But the goal is not perfection, it is direction. Each week with less alcohol is a week with more clarity and emotional autonomy. Each small victory teaches the brain that there is a path without shortcuts, and this learning strengthens rather than weakens. In the end, understanding alcohol's impact is not about demonizing the substance but about honestly observing its role in modern life. For many, alcohol is not just a liquid in a glass, it is a bridge to belonging, a buffer for anxiety, a ritual of transition between public and private life. Replacing that requires courage, but reveals a life that is clearer, more present, more stable. It stops feeling like renunciation and becomes liberation. The human body does not ask for perfection, it asks for balance. And balance is exactly what alcohol, in any repeated frequency, constantly tries to take. Recovering that balance is not a fight against the drink but a return to oneself, conscious, resilient, whole. If any part of this video spoke to you, it's not a coincidence. The body always tries to warn us when something is out of balance, we just don't always know how to listen. And you don't need to change everything today. One step is enough. One day with more awareness. If this content brought clarity, consider subscribing to the channel. Here you'll find direct explanations, practical guidance, and real knowledge about how your body works. And share it with someone who could benefit. Sometimes one click changes the direction of someone's health. Caring for your mind and body is never a loss, it is an investment.